all of the stuff together. So tonight we're going to talk about stuff or go a little bit deeper with the brain-based stuff. Think about some brain information beyond what was introduced to you in those videos. Number one, to prepare you for the weekly project, but more than anything, just to kind of, so you start looking at media through those kind of like brain-based observation eyes. Cool?
Cool.
Awesome. I do ask, again, just participation. It's you and me here, which is awesome. But I would love for some feedback and stuff like this. I get tired of hearing my own voice sometimes, especially when I play the archives back or the recordings back. I'm like, oh my God, did I really have to talk that much? So would love to hear your input on some of this stuff.
Okay.
I'm picking up on the fact that you're not shy, so I greatly appreciate that. All right. So again, as I just said, tonight's objective is pretty much just to go and to clarify the three parts of the brain and to identify specific strategies, because it's really great if we're introduced to this stuff. But more than anything, I want you guys to understand how to use it when you're designing media, or how to kind of translate this stuff into very specific strategies that you can use later on. That's the most important part. So let me ask you, on the typical brain, and again, I get it that there's going to be extenuating circumstances on either end of the spectrum, but in a typical brain, do you think our brain is built more to remember or to forget?
To remember.
And this is the thing that I think is really important. Let me share a little piece of information with you, and then we'll revisit that. So the way that our brain is built, we have this tiny little filter in the back of our brain, and it allows of course, I don't think they can say for sure 100%, but about 2,000 pieces of data per second. So your brain right now is picking up on the temperature of the room, how comfortable or uncomfortable your chair is, hopefully what I'm saying. Right now I'm watching a squirrel out a window. So, your brain picks up on all of these different things, and it only filters out, so about 2,000 pieces of data are hitting your brain at any given second. Do you think we hold on to all of that?
No.
Absolutely not. If you can hold on to most of that, then I highly recommend that you get a plane ticket to go to Vegas tonight and make tons and tons of money in an hour. But it's funny because I think we've been conditioned, because the way our school system is set up, to think that we are capable of remembering everything. We'll just memorize it. And if you just memorize it, then that means you learned it. And that's not necessarily the case. So our brain is taking in all of this information, and for efficiency's sake, it's actually built to forget as much as possible, just so you have more room to continue taking in information. So the whole reason that I bring this up is because what this means to us as media strategists is we have got to figure out a way to get our audience to focus on whatever it is that we want them to focus on. So hence why we need to learn about this wonderful piece of 3-pound gray matter that every single one of us has. We just use it to different extents. So hopefully you recognize this visual, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was in those little video clips, which I'm hoping that those were helpful. That was the first series that I ever found where they actually talked about the brain in layman terms and didn't necessarily use the, 30 syllable and vowel descriptions and make it far more complicated than it needed to be. I think that's why we shy away from learning about the brain, because I think they make it to where I can't even pronounce the words, let alone spell them, let alone ever say them again. And it's really not about knowing the names of the parts or memorizing all of that stuff. It's really just about having a very basic understanding of how to figure out leveraging it. So as we go through this stuff, if you memorize the labels, yay, but please know that's not the intent, and that's not what I'm looking for. So please don't feel any pressure to make sure that you know that the limbic system is here and the parietal lobe is there, and that's not what we're going for. So this very basic part of the brain, as they essentially kind of wrapped up in all those videos, is that it simply drives our every thought, feeling, and action, which means absolutely everything we do. Which baffles me that we don't start learning about this stuff. I mean, I'd love to have our school systems changed to where they start talking about this stuff. Like, imagine being in middle school and when you start feeling like you're not doing things the way everybody else does, if you understood how your brain was processing and understood how your brain evolved, I think it would help us tons instead of just feeling like we're not as smart as the next guy or we don't understand information or, it would give us a huge advantage.
That makes a lot of sense to me because I don't test very well. I always made really good grades. I always, I would study and I would feel like I was learning the material. And then when it came to standardized tests or big tests, then I would really have trouble remembering it. And I never really understood why. Um, and that makes a lot of sense to me. It was more of a memorization. If you memorize this and then someone will ask me a question and be like, oh, I learned that in third grade, but wait, I don't know the answer. So I really didn't learn it. I was told about it. I looked at the information and I never retained it because really all I did was memorize what I was supposed to memorize,
You are,
for that test, for that homework, and then it just, and then I forgot it.
and then poof, it disappears.
Mm-hmm.
And you're absolutely right. The reason is because they're expecting us to process just on this most, the lowest common denominator that our brain will do is memorize information.
Mm-hmm.
And the hard thing is if you memorize it, it doesn't mean you learned it. And that's another myth that I think a lot of people are under this impression. There's that whole idea if you don't use it, you lose it.
Right.
And that's not necessarily true. It's if you learn it, then it actually imprints on your brain. It's like taking a piece of paper and crumpling it up. And then if you try to straighten that piece of paper out, those little ridges, that's precisely what happens to your brain if you actually learn it. If you memorize it, then you have to count on triggers to get back to it if it even stuck.
Right.
So, gosh, if we start talking school reform, I'll be on the line with you for hours and hours and hours. It's probably my biggest pulpit because we just simply do not have a school system that is set up to really leverage what we know about the brain these days. But to make you feel better, to flash back when you started feeling bad that you weren't doing good on tests, it doesn't have anything to do with your intelligence and your ability to learn. If anything, what that's saying is that you don't do well on the most least common denominator of being able to learn. So that should make you feel good.
That makes me feel a lot better.
There you go. Okay, so we do know the brain absolutely takes care of everything that we do. And those videos did a really good job of just kind of giving a very gross overview of the three different parts. So, what do you remember from the primitive or the primal part?
That it's your basic instincts. That part helps you to know how to breathe, keep your heart rate, kind of your basics to keep you alive.
Most definitely. That is its prime job, is to keep you alive. And it's funny because we're probably thinking, well, what does breathing have to do with any conversation and creating media or being a strategist? But you have to consider this part of the brain takes care of all of that for you. So could you imagine having to walk through life every second being inhale, exhale, circulate, digest, inhale, exhale, circulate, digest? You'd never have time to do anything else. So this part of the brain takes care of that for you. But even beyond just those automatic survival mechanisms, you had mentioned a minute ago something about, another verbiage for it is kind of like the fight or flight, right?
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about what you know about fight or flight.
Trying to remember what I've learned before. It's more like you get into a situation and you have to calculate, should you run from this or will it benefit you to run, or will it benefit you to stay and deal with what's in front of you?
You're pretty much there. The only difference is that it's absolutely instinctual. It's not
Right.
something that we like consider or think about or decide. It is 100% instinctual. The best analogy that I can correlate with that is, have you ever seen, whether it's America's Funniest Videos or any video on YouTube where somebody scares somebody, right? And
Right.
think about how they respond. It's an
Sometimes they
immediate.
punch them and run the
Yeah,
other way.
exactly. They either literally draw back fists to get ready to punch the person, or they jump and run, or it is the surge of energy that is meant to keep you alive. Because the way that the theories are stating is that our brain has evolved over time. So, this is more of our caveman brain where it was constantly under surveillance of danger and wanting to keep us alive. So, those instincts are meant to get you to run or to fight, one or the other. So again, flash forward to 21st century, what the heck does that have to do with us creating media? The thing that I want us to remember is that part of that survival is beyond just the automatic survival behaviors, the movement or balance that the video talked about. The thing that I want to focus on is this idea of the built-in alarm that's constantly scanning for danger. If we were to translate that into what we see in the media, what that would translate to is how much do we see in the media that's centered around violence or fear? Or, of course, for our survival brain, it's looking at it for procreation, but the media translates that into sex, and then anything to do with nutrients or food or that. But the top two we see in our media all the time. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. It's billboards, it's magazines, it's news, which I get the news, but they sensationalize it to the point where it focuses on these kind of things. It's TV shows, it's the top movies, it's all of that stuff has a tendency to focus on either danger, violence, or fear, or sex.
Mm-hmm.
And now, knowing that that is correlated with this lowest common denominator part of our brain, that survival instinct, it makes sense that that attracts attention because everybody is processing on that level. Everybody has that sense of awareness if there is danger or if there is something that kind of taps into that part of the brain. So that kind of helps explain why the primitive or the primal part of the brain is something that we see so often in different media outlets. And if I well, I'll show you an example in just a minute, but before we get there, kind of touching back on that idea of fight or flight, uh, what are your thoughts on the idea of stress? Do you think that all stress is bad?
No,
Why
I
not?
think that some stress can help you make a better or the right decision. It can teach you things. If you are in a situation and you don't get stressed about it, you could make the wrong decision or make a decision um, that could harm someone, could harm yourself. Um, I think media and studies and people just make stress seem bad. That it's bad for your health. It makes people gain weight. So people actually stress about stress.
It's
Um,
true.
and I've been in stressful situations, but I've come out the better for it because it taught me something.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. A lot of times we forget that mistakes aren't mistakes, they're lessons, as long as you're taking something out of it, most definitely. And there is this idea of there's distress that you probably should be very concerned about for your health, but there's also
Right.
this idea of eustress that is a healthy level of stress. It's there's a lot of us that can relate to this idea of I do better when the deadline gets near. I do better under pressure. And I think there's a lot of people that think that's an excuse, but the fact of the matter is, some people, not everybody, they do better under stress or under pressure, because what happens is your brain starts secreting all of these chemicals, adrenaline, testosterone, cortisol, all of this stuff to help you focus. So it's kind of like that level of fight or flight, but not quite to the extreme. And again, an analogy that I have a tendency to use here. Have you ever found yourself in your car driving somewhere that you've never been, and you pull out of the comfort of your driveway and you're in the area you're familiar with and you've got your tunes jamming and it's no problem whatsoever? And then all of a sudden you find yourself in the new area where you're looking for the new building, or it's uncomfortable, and what do?
Freak out.
Well, you have a tendency to turn the radio down, right?
I do. When I first moved to Orlando, there were certain parts of I-4 that I would drive on, and I was very comfortable on those parts. And when I had to start venturing to other parts of the interstate, I would do that. I would get nervous. I would turn the radio completely off. I would sit up in my seat and be paying attention. It's the same interstate. It's just in a different, it's just a few miles down the road. But I wasn't comfortable driving on that stretch of road. And then I would get back to the part that I was comfortable with and relax a little bit.
Yeah, your story, that's exactly what my point is, that it's a great example, is that when you're uncomfortable, you turn the radio down. And the reason for that is because when we're uncomfortable, our senses are heightened. So what didn't bother us before, now all of a sudden is a major distraction. I can listen to the radio all day long as I'm comfortable. But as soon as I get out of my comfort zone, now it's distracting me. Now it's a problem. So that's a great analogy or an example of what happens when we're in an area where we're not comfortable, or when we have that just a little bit of stress. Then our senses become heightened. We become super focused. Like you said, even your body language changes. You sit up straight. You're far more aware of what's going on. And I don't know, call me crazy, but as a media strategist, having an audience that is curious, focused, attentive, having heightened senses, those are good things. We just have to figure out how to make sure that we don't push it from eustress to distress. So tapping into audience members' comfort zone is a great way to get them to focus on whatever it is that you're trying to convey. And in fact, think about, just to make this even a little bit more tangible, do you know anybody that plays video games, or do you play video games?
Yes.
Okay. So how many of those people, or have you ever found yourself where you sit down and you think, okay, I'm only going to play 10 or 15 minutes, just 10 or 15 minutes. And then 2 or 3 hours later, you've still got the game controller in your hand. You're still so super focused that if anybody did come in the room, you would have had no idea. Yeah, that's another really good example. If we can figure out how to tap into that, again, the eustress, not the distress, then you've got the audiences focused, you've got them attentive, you've got them, just completely losing the sense of time sometimes. So, why do you think people get so engaged when they're playing video games?
They're interested in the graphics and the sound and the strategy. They have to interact and engage with it to be successful.
Love.
To win. There's always some sort of outcome, whether it's in a sports game, you want to win the game, or in a war game, you have to kill this person, or you need to win. It's kind of a need to want to succeed, so they focus in and use all their senses, so they do win.
You nailed it. I mean, I think there's a lot of times where we look to these very researched theories to understand and get an idea. But sometimes, if we just step back and look at typical human behavior, we can learn so much from that. So, the idea of gaming, some of the things that you said that really stood out is that it's interactive, that the person is engaged, that there's a specific outcome, that they want to succeed. And the other thing is it's essentially risk free. So,
Mhm.
if I die on this level, that doesn't mean I'm really going to die in real life. I get instant feedback, so I know exactly what I did wrong and I can apply it immediately to do better. So, all of that stuff, if we can figure out again how to leverage that in a media world, then we're going to have essentially the same reaction that we get from gamers when they sit down and grab a game controller. So, what we can learn from this is that strategically, to tap into that part of the brain, if we can bring in a sense of danger, of course, we all know sex gets attention regardless of who it is, whether we want to admit it or not. It definitely pulls our attention as human beings. We cannot help it. It's the primal part of our brain. Now, how far we go with that, that's a whole different story. But we definitely know that that is a tactic that works. And then, as far as like if we correlate with making it tangible by looking at the video game, bringing in novelty, constantly changing, or at least changing enough to keep people's interest. Let's tie
Right.
it back to the video game. If you were playing the video game and you won it within the first 10 minutes, and you saw exactly what was going to happen, and the level stayed exactly the same, and the characters didn't change, and there were no new little nuggets to go find, I have a feeling we would be bored with it the first go round.
Mhm.
But one of the other things that game designers do that keep us so engaged is that idea of novelty, especially if it's something that we completely didn't expect. And then bringing in that, making that eustress of making them slightly uncomfortable to heighten their senses and to, like we were talking about earlier. So these ideas right here are fantastic strategies to use to tap into that primal part of the brain. Make sense?
Yeah. Makes
Okay.
a lot of sense.
Is there anything else that you can think of, knowing a little bit more about the primal brain that I didn't think of?
Um, I don't think so.
And this isn't a speak now or forever hold your peace. It's just definitely want you thinking about it and trying to, again, take what we learn about that part of the brain and come up with very specific strategies that we can use. But all of
Right.
these are doable as a media strategist, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, we see it all the time. In fact, this is literally, I don't even have to search hard to find examples for what I'm talking about, which is my favorite thing. This is just a snapshot of a TV guide. I think I took it like a couple nights ago or whenever I took it, but primetime TV, if you look at the TV shows that are showing on this TV guide, how much of the TV shows on here represent precisely what we were just talking about?
Yep. The majority of them are violence or death, and then the rest are sex and.
Yeah, they don't even try to like sugarcoat it or do like a, smoke screen anymore. I mean, for the love of God, in the upper left-hand corner, you've got sex in this huge word, masters of sex across the top. You've got Law and Order or Law and Order Special Victims Unit, not once but twice.
Twice.
Let's fear, murder by numbers. It's
Mhm.
just it
It's in the
reckless.
title now.
Yeah, you've got reckless, vicious. It just, and this wasn't even something I had to search for. This is just right there every single
Mhm.
night.
Mhm.
So if we start looking at this kind of stuff through the eyes of a brain-based strategist, we understand what's going on. We get the fact that they're doing this because they know that it's going to reach. Do you think that this part reaches a few people or the masses?
The masses.
Absolutely, because every single one of us processes on that survival mode. It's not like, only a small portion of the population, their brain functions on this level where it wants to keep them alive. every single human being processes similarly, that's a hard word for me to say, evidently, similarly through that part of the brain. So that's precisely why we see so many TV shows, so many movies, so many, anything, media campaigns. That's why we see politicians when they're doing their campaigns focusing on such negativity, because it reaches the masses instead of the few. So that brings up a really interesting question that we're going to ponder on in future classes during media psych, but this idea of, as a media strategist, are you wanting to reach the masses or do you want to have purpose? Because a lot of times it's very difficult to do both of those at the same time.
Right.
Hence why we don't see a lot of TV shows, at least on regular prime time, not necessarily cable and PBS and all that stuff. They do a great job of that. But a lot of the primetime stuff doesn't necessarily get us to think. It's not necessarily higher order processing. It's all of this primal stuff. So it's definitely something to think about given the fact that you're going to go into that industry. So the second part of the brain, the feeling, what do you remember from that?
It controls your emotions. It helps you. Try to remember.
You're doing great.
It
Well, let me ask you a specific question. Do the emotions trump thinking, or does thinking trump the emotions?
Thinking trumps the emotions.
It can, most definitely, if you're conscientiously trying to make that happen. And I think a lot of times we forget that we can do that we can
Right.
make the choice to have our thinking trump our feelings. I wish that everybody answered it as quickly the way that you did, because I think there needs to be a bigger awareness that we actually can trump the emotions with thinking. But a lot of times, the initial reaction is going to be based out of this emotion stuff. And the video talked about like the anger, fear, pleasure, our social experiences, impulses, but the parts they touched on that I think we can really leverage as media designers is the idea that this part of the brain drives our behaviors and our habits, which is something that we should be highly aware of how to do that, given that that is, again, going to be part of our purpose as media strategists. This is a big one too. I want you all to be really familiar with the idea of triggers and how triggers work to attach those emotions with memories. And then the idea that this is the part of the brain that responds to threats and rewards. I like to look at this part of the brain as like the best pharmaceutical company that's ever existed. And any and every drug that we have out there is trying to mimic what this part of the brain already naturally does. Just sometimes it doesn't do it as quickly as we would like to have it done. But this idea of triggers and threats and rewards are something we really need to consider. So, out of this idea of the emotional part of the brain, some strategies, again, you guys have had lots of classes touch on the idea of story and how and why story is so important. That drama is, again, what taps right into that part of the emotions. And the biggest thing is we definitely need to make whatever we're creating relatable to whatever audience we're trying to kind of convey the information to. And then for those triggers, senses, memories, a lot of times I think in the media, they try to tap into memories of things that have already happened. But another thing I think we really need to kind of try to implement and pull in is the idea of tapping into people's desires. So it doesn't necessarily have to be it's something that's already happened, but it's something that's really important to them, something that they're passionate about, and all of those things. So some very specific ideas on this is, well, we'll get there in a second, but do you think that the emotions will reach the masses, or do you think it'll just reach a few?
I think emotions would reach the masses. You know, when you said that, it made me think of the new Coke campaign, putting, share Coke with, and it has a name on a can. I have seen people that I know don't even like Coke that have bought these cans because it has their name on it or someone's name that they know. And their whole campaign is to share it with someone, and that's an emotion everyone feels every day, is sharing either with a friend, a loved one. Nobody wants to be alone, and Coke has taken that and said, hey, share our product with someone that you care about. And they're already a internationally recognized brand. They don't need to use that to boost their sales. Everyone, people know what Coke is. People already like Coke, but to, you know, they still use that, and it's been very effective, I think.
Yeah, I love that you brought that campaign up because not only does it tap into that social need that we have, again, that is completely innate in us, but think about everything we just talked about in the primal part. All of the words that you use to describe gaming applies perfectly to that campaign. It's
Mm-hmm.
instant gratification, it's
Yeah.
interactive, it engages the consumer, and there's a specific outcome. You know who is getting that Coke that you're sharing it with.
Mm-hmm.
So not only is it pulling in on strings on the social aspect of it, but it's also tapping into all of that primal stuff that we know works so beautifully just by looking at how gamers respond.
Right.
Yeah, very, very brilliant campaign. I don't know who came up with that, but Coke has a tendency to really find very creative ways to get their product out there and
Mm-hmm.
reinvent themselves without reinventing themselves.
Right.
And again, that sense of novelty. This is something we've never seen before. So if
Mm-hmm.
five more companies come behind them and do the same thing, they'll probably get a response because it's still fairly new, but still not the same response that Coca-Cola got because it was brand new. It was something we've
Right.
never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
So you are correct 100% that the emotions will definitely reach the masses. But the one thing we need to consider here when we're developing a campaign is that it's going to vary depending on the person's past experiences. So if you use a campaign, for example, based on love, well, somebody may have a very negative connotation and a very negative experience and very negative triggers to that type of button, emotional button,
Right.
so to speak. So, as we're developing our campaigns, if we can come up with emotions that we know are going to be universal, the biggest universal one is a sense of appreciation or a sense of
Mm-hmm.
gratitude. And again, the example that you just gave, Coca Cola. So you're doing something nice for somebody, but not out of this. I don't want to use the word contrived because it's certainly, they're not all contrived, but out of this kind of forced emotion. It's just this, I want to do something nice.
Right.
And then there's a sense of gratitude on the other end. So, gratitude, appreciation, all of those are pretty universal and not necessarily going to change a lot based on their past experiences.
Right.
So, it's another reason why we see emotions so much in advertising because they get that. It's definitely grabs our attention the quickest for sure. So, again, some very specific strategies. Not that positive emotions don't grab attention, but negative emotions have a tendency to get our attention quicker. And then the positive emotions have a tendency to be something that you would want to use to change behavior. So negative emotions to grab attention more because of that primal survival stuff, and then positive emotions if you're asking them to do something or trying to change a behavior from your audience members. As a strategist, you definitely want to consider how you're bringing in different rewards, different punishments. Research they're showing today is that rewards far outweigh punishment when it comes to the responses that we're looking for, when it comes to engagement, when it comes to actually acting on the information that we're conveying. So, if at all possible, rewards are the best thing that you can leverage.
Right.
Emotion, as you so So poignantly said earlier, logic can trump emotion if we conscientiously choose to do that. But if we're just going on pure responses, then emotion has a tendency to trump logic. For triggers, we can use senses, we can use memories, we can use colors, we can use music, and even timestamps. And this is something that I don't see that often, and I wish I would see more of it because it's certainly effective, is the idea of timestamps. And what I mean by that is, I don't, we'll see if this plays. Do you remember this?
Anybody? Julie, hey, guess what day it is? Oh, come on, I know you can hear me. Mike. What day is it, Mike? Listen, guess what today is?
So,
Ronnie, how happy are folks who save hundreds of
so
dollars switching to Geico?
completely
I'd say
brilliant.
happier than a camel on Wednesday.
Sorry, this is not stopping.
Geico.
Okay. So completely brilliant in their marketing campaign, because what do you think happens on Wednesdays?
Everyone does that.
Yeah, everyone sends this to their friends. They forward it. They do whatever they can to keep this marketing campaign going, not because they're supporting Geico, but because it's Wednesday. So every Wednesday, Geico sees a spike in free advertising just because they use that timestamp trigger. And the funny thing is this commercial came out quite a while ago, and they're still showing spikes in people sending this, forwarding this, doing anything they can to, again, it's essentially free advertisement for Geico. So very, very smart approach by just simply putting some sort of day or timestamp or something that will trigger people to go in and kind of tap back into this campaign on that given day. So another advertisement campaign that I think does a really good job, have you ever heard of Volkswagen's Fun Theory?
I don't think so.
They were really, a while ago, they wanted to try a different marketing campaign. And somebody was brilliant and came up with the idea of putting a call out there for the public to send them ideas on how to improve things in life simply by having fun. One of the campaigns that somebody suggested, once the suggestions were received and they picked a handful of them, then of course VW went and did everything they needed to do to record it, and video it, so then that way they could use the campaign. But one of them was, I love, because I personally hate littering. It's one of my true pet peeves. So what they did, they had a littering problem in a local park, so they rigged the trash cans to where if somebody would throw something away, it would make that sound effect of and they had all these videos around the park, and what they caught on the video was people running around looking for things to throw away just so they could hear the sound effect. So changing behavior through fun is something we definitely need to think about. And another example that you may have seen, I don't know, you might have seen this, we'll see. Have you seen, well, let me ask you this. As human beings, if you have a choice of either taking an escalator or a stair, what do most human beings take?
Escalator.
Yeah. We are some lazy folk. So if we have the choice, then yeah, we'll definitely take an escalator. Look at how lonely the escalator gets. 66%. That is hugely significant. I love this ending. Dun, dun, dun. So, out of this, we could probably deduct that if you make things fun, then people will change their behavior all the time. But the sense of novelty. If you were to go back there 6 months later and they had the same setup, do you think we would still see 66% or 66% more people taking the stairs than the escalator?
Probably not.
Probably not, because we've been there, done that. I'm bored with it. All right, the escalator's still there. So we get back into our old routines unless we keep things novel, unless we continue to try to change things so it's the unexpected. If you get a chance, I know spare time as a Full Sail student is kind of a tongue-in-cheek sentence or statement, but if you get a chance, check out the other fun theory campaigns that they did. They're really, really incredible. And my favorite thing again is that this wasn't some marketing guru that came up with these ideas. It was the public that sent in the ideas and then they just went out and created them.
Yeah.
It was a really neat campaign. So that leads us to the thinking part of the brain. Can you remember what they shared with us in the videos for the thinking part?
The thinking part, it's the largest part of our brain. It stores memories. It allows us to, or helps us communicate. It helps us imagine things, use our imagination. This is the one that allows us to change our minds from those primitive instincts. And it is it really is what defines us from other species.
Absolutely. Yes, 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 and yes. Everything you just said. Done deal. You are correct. And this is the part that I love that you said it so early on, that it can trump our emotion if we choose to do so. I mean, have you ever heard of the idea that if you're mad or if you're upset, count to 10?
Mm-hmm.
Does it work? Not
sometimes.
But not really.
200 or something.
Yeah, somebody cuts me off in traffic. I'm okay, 9, 10, and I'm still not real happy. Although that really doesn't make me mad, because truly, if that's the worst thing that happens to me today, I think I'm okay.
The more, though, I have had the advice before, especially in relationships, that if you get mad about something, sleep on it, or at least come back to it hours later, maybe not 10 seconds later, but hours later, if you're still mad about it, that's when when you talk about it, bring it up, because most likely you're going to forget. And I've used that because there were times I would get mad about something, and it's not even a big deal, and then if I just think on it 30 minutes, even maybe 30 minutes later, I forgot about it or don't even remember why I was mad.
Well, yeah, and the reason that happens is because, again, let's flash back to that primal part of the brain. The primal part of the brain, or caveman brain, is 100% built to defend us, to make sure we survive, which means anytime a stressor happens, it releases chemicals that are built, like we were talking about, to either get us to fight or run. So, flashback to caveman days, that was a good thing because you could go out to find dinner and the next thing you know, you could become dinner. So it was good that it was that built-in automatic survival mechanism to make you move, to have adrenaline pumping through your brains quicker, cortisol, testosterone, all of those things. But flash forward to today, you don't go down Publix supermarket aisles and look behind you and see a saber-toothed tiger, hopefully. But all the other little stressors that we experience throughout the day results in the same physiological response. So you get stressed about something in the morning and your brain kicks out some of those chemicals. You get stressed out again a little while later, more chemicals, more chemicals. Every single time you experience stress, and then what do most of us do all day? We sit. So you have all of these chemicals floating through your veins that are built to get you to move, and all we do is sit. So they don't go away. And this is why we see a lot of road rage. This is why we see a lot of people flying off the handle over things that really aren't that big of a deal. But the fact of the matter is they have not done anything to release all of those chemicals. So your idea of just, if you can hold off and figure out if you're still mad about it tomorrow, really good idea. Or if it's more immediate and your emotions are taking over, and the next thing you know, you're saying things you didn't mean to say, you're doing things that in a logical way you probably never would have done. The idea of counting to 10 comes from the right place. Essentially, what they're saying is if we can make ourselves think, then we will override our emotions, because you can't think and have emotions. They don't play well together. But the idea of counting to 10, I'm hoping as grown adults, we can count to 10 without a whole lot of thought processes behind it. So if you can do something for 10 seconds or more that actually makes you think, like for me, it's okay, do your times tables, or try to remember the capitals of the states, or just anything that truly engages the thought process of the brain, it will override the emotions. But if you try to do something that doesn't make you think, then it doesn't work. I don't know where you got that advice as far as like waiting 30 minutes or till the next day, but if everybody could learn to do that, would probably be much happier people. So the video, when it talked about the thinking part of the brain, talked about planning, analyzing. This is the part of the brain that is a media strategist. You want to make sure that you're giving them ideas for how to, do whatever it is that you're asking them to do, have a plan in place. But again, the biggest part that I want you guys to focus on in creating your strategies is this idea of it controls decision making. It can control emotions as long as we put those parameters in place. And like we were just talking about, it can override those automatic responses. So some very specific strategies that I want you guys thinking about is this idea of making sure that there is a balance of both the emotion and the logic in any media campaign. If we look way back when, like in the 50s or a little bit earlier and later than that, most ad campaigns started out with just the logic, facts, history, statistics, all of those things. And what we realize is, again, the brain is going to initially respond to emotion. So you will want to start with something that taps into that emotion and then provide the logic. So you got their attention, but now give them the information that they're going to need to be able to actually make the plan happen. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. So here again, after you grab their attention with the emotional part of the brain, you'll want to bring in statistics, facts, history, clear step-by-step planning, anything that's going to help that logical part of the brain engage, because without it, we're going to feel the emotions, and that's going to be great, and then we're going to walk away and not do anything about it. So you definitely want to do something to intentionally bring in that thinking part of the brain. And when it comes to the thinking part, do you think that's going to hit a few people, or do you think that's going to hit the masses?
I think that's going to hit a few people.
You're right. And this is precisely why when I showed the screenshot of the TV guide, it wasn't full of TV shows that get us to think or to tap into that critical analysis part of our brain. It reaches a few people because we all think completely differently. Not that anybody, we always want to frame it as far as smart people and not smart people. We all are smart, just in different ways. But if you're tapping into the intelligence, you're not going to have as wide of an audience because everybody processes differently. So this is why when I was saying earlier, as a media strategist and as a media designer, you guys are going to find yourself asking that question quite a bit. Do I want to reach a few of the people and have a sense of purpose and get them thinking? Or do I want to use that primal emotional stuff and reach the masses very easily? It's a big question that you guys are going to be faced with for sure. Okay, so one more thing I want to just kind of cover really quickly when it comes to the brain is you have heard of like the left brain, right brain, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and a lot of people have, and it's very widely known that the left brain is very logical, very sequential, very analytical, and the right side of the brain is far more creative. We all know that, and but the good thing is we've got to figure out a way to leverage this in our media campaigns. So I love this visual of it simply because if you're creating websites, if you're creating posters, any brochures, the biggest suggestion that I would have is you see down here you have the bulleted items, but they're done with color, and then you've got your pictures, you've got your concept maps. So it's a balance of both. And then this way you know that you're creating like a whole brain experience instead of just having bulleted items where your left brain dominant learners or left brain dominant audience members would be thrilled, but your right brain dominant audience members would kind of be disconnecting. And then on the flip side, if it's all visuals and all colors and all concept maps, then the left brain dominant audience members would kind of be left for wanting more. Make sense? Sweet. So really, when it comes to all this stuff, simply to sum it up, if we can just figure out how to leverage all those different parts of the brain, and it sounds to me like you're on a good roll with that because you certainly have an understanding of the difference between the primal, the emotional, and the feeling, and then the thinking part of it. And it's also a great idea, like we were talking about, to consider who you're trying to reach as far as your audience members. If you're trying to reach a few people, if you're trying to reach the masses, what part of the brain you would want to leverage for that as well. So questions, cares, concerns on any of the stuff we talked about?
No, I don't think so. Not right now.
And again, like I said earlier, this is so not a speak now or forever hold your peace. So if you do come up with any questions or need clarification on it, if you start thinking about it and think, but what if, then please, please, please feel free to contact me and let me know.
Great, thank you.
Sweet. The only recommendation that I do, if you haven't already, I really want to recommend that you go through the project and the analysis instructions, and then that way if you do need help, there will be plenty of time for me to be able to respond to you. And then the other piece of advice that I like to give with the analysis and the project, because they are weighted heavier, is when you're going through the content and say you're reading through it before you submit the final submission, a question I really encourage my students to think about is if somebody with no prior knowledge of these topics were to go through my project, would they be able to walk away with a good understanding of what it is that we're trying to discuss? And if the answer is yes, then you know you've nailed the details. If the answer is no, that somebody with no prior knowledge would really understand this, then make sure that you go back and include all of the details. I think sometimes students unknowingly, not intentionally at all, kind of have this idea in the back of their head, well, the teacher knows it, so, but we're using these projects to gauge your understanding. So the best suggestion is just think about when you're putting the information together that the person that's going to review it has absolutely no prior knowledge. And then that way you have a tendency to innately just fill in a lot more details. Yay. Alrighty, Molly. Well, I am super happy that you showed up tonight and were willing to participate in the discussion. I greatly appreciate that. And if there is anything I can help you with, please don't hesitate to let me know.
I will. Thank you.
Sweet. Have a great night.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.